Hello there. My name is Cliff, and I'm a solutions architect with the company VDX. VDX is a Microsoft Gold partner and certified cloud service provider. And today, in this video, we're going to go through a pretty cool technology called Microsoft Azure Site Recovery. In this video, we're going to review how your organization could leverage this solution for many different purposes, including business continuance, disaster recovery, and even migration of your infrastructure to the Microsoft Azure cloud. We are also going to go through a setup and configuration of Azure Site Recovery, as well as run through a test plan to allow you to experience how well and how easy business continuance and disaster recovery could be tested to fit your organization's requirements. Now, before we go into detail of Azure Site Recovery, let's first understand why business continuance and disaster recovery is critical to customers. Microsoft did a lot of research on this topic, and I posted these in this slide. Every organization experiences around 4 disruptions each year. Now, thanks to nature, we don't get 4 disaster situations every year. However, another report talks about most of the time the disruption is caused by issues like software failure, hardware failure, manual error, power failure, or power maintenance, which are far more frequent than disaster situations like fire, flood, earthquake, etc. And for these disruptions, recovery times are few hours. There's another report which talks about cost of disruption to businesses, and it varies from business to business. However, the average cost was coming around $1.5 million an hour. This is a huge cost for disruptions. However, even bigger issue is 4 out of 10 businesses never reopen after a disaster. In addition, each of these disruptions have severe impact on your company brand and reputation. And last but not least, most of the compliances like ISO, HIPAA, FedRAMP, protection and recovery is a key tenet. So if you want to recover your applications and have that be certified by any of these standards, you need business continuance and disaster recovery, as many customers ask for these certifications as a mandatory criteria. So now that we talked about business continuance and disaster recovery and what it means to your organization, let's talk a little bit about the challenges organizations face with implementing a business continuity and disaster recovery strategy. The first one is cost. The cost to set up a secondary data center, the cost to purchase expensive SAN arrays and expensive replication technologies, as well as exceeding operational expenses. Now, in spite of spending so much money, many of the DR solutions are not successful due to the complexity associated with disaster recovery. First, let's define what we mean by disaster recovery. Here, we are not talking about off-site backups where you send your data off-site by tape or to the cloud. If that is your DR strategy, if you hit any of the disruptions we talked about, it will take days for you to recover your applications, and not just millions of dollars you'll lose during that period, but your business may not even reopen. So during these disruptions, every minute is critical, and a DR solution optimizes your time to recover your applications. So with Azure Site Recovery serving as your DR management infrastructure, it will help you to automatically connect your applications to the right network, assign the right IP addresses, so that not only will your application be available, but will also be able to serve client requests. Last but not least, you need to understand how you monitor the health of your organization's recovery infrastructure. The result of these challenges is many workloads go unprotected. Microsoft did not accept the current situation and started Azure Site Recovery with the vision of disaster recovery for every customer, for every application. In this slide, I highlighted some of the use cases in which your organization could leverage Microsoft Azure Site Recovery, and I broke it down into 3 categories: disaster recovery and business continuance, cloud migrations, and dev test environments. Now let's talk about disaster recovery and business continuance. The first bullet allows single-click application recovery through the creation of application consistency test plans. That means that you can leverage ASR to group applications for business continuance and disaster recovery purposes so that your organization can fail over and recover on an application by application basis. You can also leverage Microsoft Azure Site Recovery for compliance assurance without impacting production environments. Now, most organizations have periodic, annual, routine business continuance and disaster recovery testing that takes place. Azure Site Recovery test plans allow for isolated application recovery test plans into the Microsoft Azure cloud without on-premise production application disruption. You can also use Microsoft ASR for disaster avoidance in a case that your organization needs to respond to a potential natural disaster warning. ASR could be used to fail over certain components in the infrastructure, such as Active Directory or DNS, or certain applications in the infrastructure into the Microsoft Azure cloud as a protective measure to ensure continued productivity. And you also can leverage Azure Site Recovery for actual failover during real disasters such as fires and earthquakes. Now, the second use case category is cloud migrations. You can leverage Microsoft ASR for the conversion of workloads into the Microsoft Azure cloud. So if you're running on-premise applications and would like to see and experience what those applications and how they would perform in the Microsoft Azure cloud, you can leverage ASR to do the actual conversions from on-premise into the Microsoft Azure cloud. And if you're an organization that does periodic mergers and acquisitions, you can also use Azure Site Recovery as a way to move the acquired organization's data center from on-premise into the Microsoft Azure cloud in order to reduce physical data center costs by running a smaller footprint, or even actually close or cut off the contract with the organization's data center facilities. Now, the last point is dev and test environments. You can use Azure Site Recovery to create identical copies of on-premise production applications and move those identical copies into the Microsoft Azure cloud. What that allows you to do is save costs on buying equipment for on-site application testing, where you can perform that same type of testing of the application in the Microsoft Azure cloud with the ability to reset that environment. So you can use this for different testing scenarios like operating system patching and new release patching, any application patches or bits that need to be added to production. You want to be able to do that with confidence. ASR is a disaster recovery service provided from Microsoft Public Cloud Azure, and it supports different disaster recovery scenarios. The most common disaster recovery scenario where your organization has two physical data center sites in different areas of the world. Microsoft Azure Site Recovery helps to set up and manage disaster recovery between these two sites. The key point of this architecture is here, ASR offers your DR management from the cloud. However, the data for your application travels between your own sites on your own network. So Azure Site Recovery has no knowledge of what applications you are running and any data, as that information never goes to the Microsoft Azure cloud. What is also important is the key features include automated VM protection and replication, remote health monitoring, customizable recovery plans, integration with existing investments, support for heterogeneous environments, no impact recovery plan testing, and orchestrated recovery of tiered applications. Now you can also, and what's very important, is you can also be running a heterogeneous environment where ASR will support Hyper-V, VMware, as well as physical environments.
Earlier in this video, we talked about setting up and managing a secondary data center site as a primary cause of cost and complexity for organizations. So with Azure Site Recovery, Microsoft released another disaster recovery scenario where you don't need to set up a secondary site for DR. Instead, you can leverage Microsoft Azure as your DR site. Why this is appealing is it opens up so many new opportunities for disaster recovery options. So many new customers and applications can now afford disaster recovery. Today, Microsoft has this scenario available for Microsoft Hyper-V workloads, as well as the capability to support this scenario for environments running VMware vSphere and physical workloads. Earlier in this video, I highlighted how Microsoft ASR can provide a very simple DR option for your organization without the high cost and complexity. In this slide, I provided a breakdown of the steps involved to configure an on-premise Microsoft Hyper-V in VMM environment to use your Azure subscription to facilitate business continuance and disaster recovery with ASR. In a later portion of this video, I'm going to provide a walkthrough of each step as well as some additional information on how to set up and configure Azure Site Recovery for your chosen DR scenario. I am pretty excited about this part of Azure Site Recovery. ASR not only supports Microsoft Hyper-V and VMM, but also supports the ability to protect physical and VMware vSphere vCenter virtual workloads. Now, at the time of this video, this support only covers vCenter 5.1 and 5.5, with testing for 6.0 in the works. For physical workloads, you will need to consult your Azure Professional Services team to ensure your operating system is supported in the Microsoft Azure Cloud. This scenario is enabled with the technology Microsoft acquired with the InMage acquisition. For this scenario to work, we need an additional set of components, such as the mobility service, which is a lightweight, guest-based service that is automatically installed on each virtual guest or physical server being protected. The role of this service is to track changes and send them to another component called the process server. The process server captures the changes from all the protected workloads. It does the job of compression, encryption, and then sends the replicated data to the target site, where we have the target receiver component called the master target. There's also a config server, which is a management component configured at the target location. To enable this DR scenario to Microsoft Azure, you will have to install the process server on the primary site and a master target as well as config server in its own Azure subscription. Azure Site Recovery will provide a consistent DR management and orchestration experience for your workloads failing over to Azure. Another scenario is where an organization is using an on-premise SQL always-on configuration for database high availability. Microsoft worked with the SQL product teams to enable a single-click application failover using ASR. Here, SQL replication is used to replicate SQL database changes to an Azure Infrastructure as a Service virtual machine running SQL always-on. However, for web and app tiers, either Replica or Scout Channel is used to replicate changes into Microsoft Azure. Using both these scenarios, ASR can do DR for any workloads.
So now that we completed the presentation portion of this video, let's move on into the demonstration. Here, I'm going to demonstrate Microsoft ASR configuration in a Hyper-V to Azure scenario. The first thing that we need to create is a Recovery Services Vault. This is the location where all your server and data is going to be configured for Microsoft ASR. To configure an ASR Recovery Vault, the first thing you need to do is go down to New, Data Services, Recovery Services, Site Recovery Vault, Quick Create, and assign a name to your vault. In this case, we're going to call it Demo ASR Vault. And you also need to assign a region to your vault. Now, the important part of assigning a region is that all the associated components, such as the storage components, the network components, need to all be created under the same region. So in this case would be Central US. Then we're going to create our vault. So now our recovery vault has been created, the Demo ASR Vault. And what we want to do is go into the Demo ASR Vault, and for setup and recovery, select between an on-premises VMM site and Azure. The next thing we want to do is download the registration key under Preparing VMM Servers. So we want to save this registration key on our VMM server to access later. So our registration key has been downloaded to the desktop of my VMM server. The next thing I want to do is download Microsoft Azure Site Recovery Provider for installation on VMM servers. So I also want to save this to my desktop of the VMM server. So when my VMM provider has been complete, I can go ahead and run the setup on my VMM server. I'm going to hit OK. Next. Install. Then I want to register. Hit OK. And then now I'm connecting to my Microsoft ASR Vault. Here I want to provide the key file that I downloaded. And it will automatically fill in all the information that I need. So at this point of the Microsoft Azure Site Recovery registration wizard, we can type in a friendly name. A friendly name could be a data center location name or server-specific name. So I can call this VMM Server 1, if I can spell. Click Next. And at the completion of the Microsoft Azure Site Recovery registration wizard, you should receive a message stating the server was registered in the Azure Site Recovery Vault. And then you just want to click on Finish. So at this point, your server should be successfully registered in Microsoft Azure. So once we completed the registration of our ASR Vault with our VMM server, we should be able to log back into Microsoft Azure, go into our Recovery Services Vault, and in this case, Demo ASR Vault, go into Servers, and go into VMM, and then we should see our VMM server registered to Microsoft Azure. So now that we registered our VMM server with ASR in Azure, we need to create a storage account in Azure. So first thing we need to do is go to Storage, New, Data Services, Storage, Quick Create, and let's give it a name. In this case, Demo ASR. For location affinity group, it needs to be within the same region that we created our ASR vault, so it would be Central US. We would need to select an active subscription, and also replication would have to be geo-redundant. And then we want to click Create Storage Account.
For our next step, we want to log into the Hyper-V server that is managed by VMM that we installed the Azure Site Recovery provider. And we want to log into Azure and go to the recovery services and the vault that we created for ASR. In step 2, we want to click on Download Microsoft Azure Recovery Services Agent for installation on Hyper-V host servers. Then we want to save this to the desktop. Next, we want to run the Mars agent from the desktop. And then we could just click Next, Next, Install. And we can skip the registration portion of this installation. So once we downloaded our Microsoft Azure Recovery Services agent for Hyper-V, we need to proceed to step 3, and that's set up protection for the VMM clouds. So we just click on step 3. It brings us to the next screen. Here we have our VMM clouds, which is the configuration that Azure would get from our VMM and Hyper-V hosts. So we just click on our cloud, we click on Configure Protection Settings. Our target is where we're going to fail over to from our Hyper-V environment, and that's to Microsoft Azure. We have to ensure that we have the correct subscription, the storage account we created, and we can leave the rest with the defaults. So the next thing we need to do in Microsoft Azure is we need to create our networks. And in this case, we're going to be creating 2 networks. One network is for our test failovers, and the other network is for our planned failovers. And they're going to operate on 2 separate subnets. So first we need to create our production or our planned failover networks. So we go to New, Network Services, Virtual Network, Quick Create. And then we'll give it a name. We'll call it ASR Prod. We'll assign it a 172.16 address space. Remember that our geographies all have to be in the same location as the vault. So we're going to choose Central US. We're going to ensure we're using the correct DNS servers, the maximum VM counts, and our subscription. And we're going to hit Create Virtual Network. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create our test network. So we're going to hit New again, Network Services, Virtual Network, Quick Create, and call it Test ASR. And we're going to put these in the 192.168 address space. We're going to confirm our VM count. We're going to place this in the Central US location, confirm our DNS server, confirm our subscription, and click Create Virtual Network. So once you created your production and your test networks, you'll need to map those networks to your ASR vault. Now in order to do that, you need to select Step 4, Map Networks. This will ask for your source location and your target location. So our source location is our VMM environment, and our target location is Microsoft Azure. So we'll then pull up our VMM environment network. And in this case, it's VM traffic. Then we want to click Map. And since we're going to be just doing a test failover, we want to select our target subscription, and we want to select our test ASR network, which is our 192.168 network. And then we want to click on the check mark. So after the virtual networks have been mapped to the ASR vault, we need to decide what virtual machines we want to protect with Microsoft ASR. And in order to enable protection of our virtual machine, we need to go into the ASR vault. So in this case, Demo ASR Vault. We need to go under Protected Items, VMM Clouds. We need to select our cloud. And here it says no virtual machines in the cloud are enabled for protection. And we need to enable protection. And in this example, I'm just going to select one virtual machine. On the right-hand side, you need to just confirm the operating system disk, your subscription, and your storage account, and then click off the checkbox. So during this job, we can look at the details of enabling protection on a virtual machine. So now that we configured the virtual machine that we want to protect with Microsoft ASR, let's go and configure our first recovery plan. So let's go into our ASR Vault, under Recovery Plans, create Recovery Plan, and let's call this recovery plan Test ASR Recovery. Our source is going to be our VMM server. Our target is Microsoft Azure. Then we click on the Next button. And then we want to select our protected virtual machine and click the checkbox. So once a recovery plan is created, we can actually go and modify the recovery plan. So if you click on the recovery plan, you get to the Customize screen. And in this screen, you can do specific things such as add different groups, meaning that you can group your servers, so you can place your servers in a certain priority by grouping them, or you can add manual actions, meaning that after a machine is recovered, you can add a manual action to the recovery plan. So in this case, we'll add a manual action right before group 2, and we'll call it message. And then we'll call this group 2 is about to recover. And we can perform this during test failovers, planned failovers, or unplanned failovers. So right before group 2 starts to fail over, this message will appear to the administrator letting them know that group 2 is about to fail over. So now that we've modified our recovery plan, let's actually perform our test failover. So we click Test Failover. In this case, we're going to select our test network, and then we're going to hit the checkbox. And then as you can see, a test failover is in progress. As you can see, our recovery plan is now underway, but it actually stopped at this step here where it's waiting for action. So at this point, this is the manual action that we configured back when we created our recovery plan. So this is good if you ever need to run scripts or if you need to notify certain IT personnel prior to completing the test failover. So what we're going to do here is just click on Complete Test. We're going to just type in Complete Test. And then we have to confirm. And then our test is actually going to continue. So as you can see on the screen, our actual test failover has completed, and it actually goes in and cleans up the environment after the test is complete. Why a test failover is important is because you can perform disaster recovery and business continuance failover in your production environment without actually interrupting production. So Microsoft ASR gives you this test recovery option, and it goes through, it performs the test, puts your environment in kind of a separate bubble and then goes back and cleans up the environment, waiting for the next test failover. So in conclusion, like I mentioned at the very beginning of this presentation, Microsoft has certified VDX to deliver services around Microsoft ASR and Azure Backup. To get a hold of a VDX account rep to learn more about our services, you will need to email info@vdx.com. And in this slide, I just outlined some of the services that VDX offers, which include, but not limited to, designing cloud-based BCP DR, DR as a service, Azure Jumpstarts, private cloud plan design and implementation engagements around recovery services, and ASR, Azure Backup Capacity Planning. So I hope you learned a lot today about Microsoft ASR, and hopefully we can hear from you in the future.